Hello, this is Georgina Rose,
This is Nike.
This is Anthony.
And this is Ella.
and welcome to Magnolias and Magic. In this episode, we're going to be talking about a topic that has been growing in intensity, discourse, and controversy, and that would be our community's relationship with Wicca. So, when I first entered the community, Wicca was like super popular. Wicca was the sort of cool thing. Everyone was really into eclectic Wicca. But as time has gone on, Wicca has become pretty controversial, and I think this really has to do with the rise of, especially witch talk. But basically, people have started going, well, Wicca was popular, so they've sort of moved in another direction, but they've done it in a way where they've just started demonizing Wicca. So a lot of people have been going around saying that Wicca is wrong, Wicca should be canceled, Wicca's like bad for our community. I've seen a lot of people make TikToks where they're like bashing Wiccans. And it's gotten really bad. There's been a lot of accusations about Gardner that are just not true. There's been appropriation conversations, which within the context of Wicca is a lot more nuanced than people have been placing it on the internet. And a lot of these misconceptions that just, they come from misinformation. And I've talked to Wiccans who have gotten threats, they've been harassed. And it really worries me as a Thelemite because my tradition, a lot of the critiques thrown at Wicca sort of also get thrown where I stand. And I think it's a conversation we need to have. Well, we've brought on Ella, who is a Wiccan, so she can hopefully help us bring some nuance to this. But we're going to be talking about all the issues, where there is some truth to Wicca criticism, and where it is just absurd and gone way, way too far. So let's break into it.
Awesome. First of all, thank you very much for having me once again. It's very exciting. Also,
thank you for coming on.
Thank you. So this topic, I've talked about it numerous times on my platforms. So I feel like people, I guess, people that follow me know me for talking about this and being very outspoken about like how annoying it is and how like misplaced this like hate or whatever it is towards Wicca is. So I'm really glad that I'm like on here talking with you guys about it. So yeah.
I think something that I've noticed immediately, and this is kind of what I want to say out of the gate before we get into the actual criticisms, is one of the big things that I like to bring up is attack ideas, not people. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to be going pretty hard on the anti-Wicca people because I think that they are really misinformed. But as usual, if you see these topics come up, critique the points, critique the discourse, not the individuals saying it. I see a lot of the anti-Wicca camp goes really hard in attacking Wiccans, especially random Wiccans being like, I actually made a video a while ago. It's like the beauty of Mabon, and a lot of people got really mad at me about it, and it was literally just an aesthetic video. I wasn't even teaching, and people were like, going off. And don't do what they do. Do not attack the individuals. Talk about, hey, like if you see someone talking about one of the things we're going to discuss, say, hey, I disagree with you for this reason. Never go after individuals. I think that's become a really hostile trend with this discussion, and I just want to put that out there immediately. Always critique ideas, not people. But the first point I wanted to sort of get into is just clearing up what Wicca even is, because I think a lot of the misplaced critiques of Wicca come from a misunderstanding of what Wicca is. I think people in general, there's sort of two big camps of Wicca, though it gets a lot more complex, and it's like the traditional Wiccans and the eclectic Wiccans, though it gets even more complex if you get into Gardnerian, Alexandrian, Dianic, etc., etc., etc. But basically, there's sort of multiple schools of thought of Wicca, but people sort of assume all of Wicca is like eclectic internet Wicca, when that is not what the whole of Wicca was. That's not what the history of Wicca was. So I think we should first go into like sort of where Wicca came from, and then get into like what are some common beliefs and move from there. So who wants to hit off the history?
Well, Ella, do you, as the resident Wiccan, do you want to take it away?
The common one that you will see that people say is like it's a neo-pagan, nature-based religion, right? You have God and a goddess. It's very like based on the 8 Sabbats. Sabbats like celebrations essentially around the year, just in case you don't know, anyone listening. And then so you have, what else do you have? It's kind of it's pretty ceremonial, especially the traditional Wicca, and more eclectic Wicca, so more modern Wicca has kind of moved away from the more ceremonial aspect. It's so this is already where you kind of get into a little bit of the like murky waters. People are like, Gerald Gardner is the father or the founding father of Wicca, and it's like, you know, there's a bit of history with that. You have like Doreen Valiente, for example, contributing a lot. In particular, for example, something that people love talking about or love to hate on is the poem The Wiccan Rede, and things like that is usually attributed to Doreen Valiente. And with the Wiccan Rede, you have the threefold law and the harm none rule. And that is, I feel a lot of times like the center focus. Like if you dig away all of the stuff, it's those two things that piss people off most about Wicca and that they misunderstand most. And just straight off the bat, I actually grew up because I found Wicca, I didn't find it, but I like discovered it.
You found it in your backyard. Gerald Gardner and Doreen like jumped out of a bush.
Oh, exactly. No, but I discovered Wicca because I grew up in a very like witchy kind of family. But I discovered Wicca in a book that my mom gave me when I was 11, which was Silver Raven Wolf Teen Witch.
Yes.
So, so obviously, this is a little history thing, but a lot of the Wiccan books, especially older ones, will first of all interchange Wicca and witchcraft, and then you also have the harm none being like indoctrinated into you, and I have that. I have it tattooed. So wow. I was like, I have harm none tattooed under like my boob hole. And
yes.
So I still kind of go by it. I also used to be a vegan, and I also have a history of self-harming, so it was a little bit of like an entire process that I worked through.
I can imagine that would be really healing.
It actually really was, yeah. So, but a lot of that is related to Wicca, and then Wicca kind of has really become almost all-encompassing, because I see a lot of people, like, for example, on my YouTube, that think witchcraft is Wicca, and it's just because so many books focused on exclusively Wicca, because Wicca kind of seemed like the approachable, nice type of witchcraft, at least, in like the 90s and like early 2000s and stuff like that, right? So that is my take, like a little history lesson, I suppose, on Wicca. But if you guys want to add anything.
Yeah, I think Wicca, I mean, they really forged a lot for the community. Any sort in the US, or Americans, Ella is not, all the legal protections that witches and pagans have in the US under religious freedom laws are because of Wiccans. So I feel like we sort of owe Wiccans, even if you disagree with them, a lot of respect for that reason, because if you ever need to get into like a religious freedom lawsuit, Wicca is the only pagan religion that's legally recognized in the United States. And I feel like we got to kind of give them some respect, because that witchcraft is considered a protected religious practice, because it is considered part of Wicca legally. We have very weird religious freedom laws in the US.
Yeah.
So Wicca got us protection, which I feel like is pretty cool. So if you guys are ever in court, just say you're a Wiccan.
Rule of 3, I'm a Wiccan. My god and goddess are Odin and Freya, therefore I'm a Wiccan.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's legally, yeah.
Legally, it works.
It's true, yeah. Because it's, if you go into the military, apparently, I read this, I don't know if this is true, because harm none is a religious tenet of Wicca, technically you can use it to avoid a military draft. It's considered a religious exemption in the US.
All right, so if we get into a draft, consider me Wiccan. I take everything back. I'm not a Norse pagan. I'm a Wiccan now. Thank you.
But like Wiccans,
for legal purposes.
For legal purposes, I'm a Wiccan. But yeah, it can pull you out of military drafts. Like it gets you a lot of protection. And I mean, like, they were the first people to do that. And I think sort of the nice face of Wicca served a utility in our community for a long time, because during the 90s, which was right at the wake of, a lot of the satanic panic sentiments, I think that friendly face of Wicca was actually really important, because for a while, we definitely needed to kind of dissociate witchcraft from the whole, like, evil devil thing. I think that was kind of important to do. And so for that, like, I do kind of get it. And also, on the rule of 3, there are Wiccans that exist who don't follow the rule of 3, because Wicca is a pretty flexible religion. Thorne Mooney, who writes about traditional Wicca, and she has some really good books, I really like her, describe Wicca specifically as an orthopraxy, which orthodoxy is sort of religion that teaches you tenets like on you, like they tell you what to believe, you read the book. Catholicism is very orthodoxic, whereas orthopraxy is that the religion is based on practice, which Wicca falls in. So I think that's a very interesting distinction. And so because of that, you see a lot of variance in Wiccan beliefs. And so when you go to criticize Wicca, those critiques aren't necessarily going to apply to all Wiccans. Like some of the big things that I think are legitimate critiques of Wicca, like Dianic Wicca, one sect of Wicca, and they have a history of being very exclusionary. But that critique, it's not going to apply to all of Wicca. That's a critique specifically to that one sect based on their history. So it gets really complicated when we're like, yeah, not all witchcraft is Wicca, but not all Wicca is the same Wicca. Because since Wicca is the most popular paradigm, or at least it was, we can't really run numbers on that. I wish we could do like a census and somehow know. Can't really do that. But Wicca's very popular. There's a bunch of subsects. Not all Wiccans agree with each other. Honestly, if you look at like say a traditional Gardnerian Wiccan and a Wiccan and like scroll through #Wicca, you're probably going to end up meeting two different people that believe entirely different things. And so when we talk about Wicca, I think it's really important to talk about specifics and realize that, hey, this one thing, like the exclusionary issue with Dianic Wicca, that's not going to apply to a Gardnerian Wiccan who those covens mandate having both men and women. So, it gets really nuanced really fast. I think we should remember there are multiple sub-currents within Wicca. It's not like one single thing. They're unified, obviously, like it is under the same umbrella, but they are pretty different. If you talk to different Wiccans, you're going to get different answers to basic questions a lot of the time, even.
Just on top of what Georgina already said, you definitely just get a lot of I feel like it's also a difference between countries even. Like I've talked to American Wiccans and it's a completely different thing, even though they might say I'm a Gardnerian. And then you have like the European, like obviously different countries as well. Like it's just so vast. You cannot possibly like combine it all under one hat. But to completely circle back to the earlier thing you mentioned, I also feel like Wicca, in a way, not only helped with the entire satanic panic and like moving it away from the evil, but also kind of something I grew up with was taking it seriously, taking witchcraft seriously in general, because I grew up and people were like, oh, you believe in Harry Potter? And then they moved on. They were like, oh, Wicca, I've heard of that. Oh, yeah, okay. And they would like regard it better because before it was either ridiculed or you'd be like, oh, you eat babies and, like sacrifice cats. Whereas people started like being like, oh, I've heard of that. My aunt like does that. You kind of believe in spirits and animism and that sort of thing, right? Like people would have more respect for it, I think. So I feel like that's another little side note.
It's so interesting that you bring up that it makes other people take it seriously, because it's kind of the opposite in the occult community.
Yeah,
where,
nowadays, yeah.
And this ties into other points that we'll get to, but the big thing I see in occult communities is somebody hears that someone else is Wiccan, and the automatic assumption is they're not serious about magic. They're they're just playing. They're loving light and fluffy bunny. That's the big term I hear tossed around a lot. Like they assume that anybody who's Wiccan is not a serious magical practitioner. They don't have a real practice. It's just like crystal girls, and that's what they're calling themselves. And in reality, a lot of the Wiccans I know are extremely serious about their practice, and with it having more ceremonial roots, with like some of the Golden Dawn and OTO type influence pre-founding. People don't realize that when you when you're in a formal tradition, because obviously the formal traditions are going to be different than eclectic solitary, but when you're in a formal tradition of Wicca, there's a lot to it. There's ceremony. It's a whole thing. It's not just, you gather around a fire and you sing Kumbaya and that's your religion. That's it. You did Wicca. No, there's so much more to it. Yeah. And so this assumption that it's for fluffy bunny idiots who don't know what they're doing and just want to have like a special name. No, I'm serious. They act like they're stupid for being Wiccan. And it's ridiculous, because have y'all ever spoken to a real Wiccan? Have you ever spoken to like a Gardnerian or Alexandrian high priest? Well, anything?
Yeah,
no.
Well, that's not a new take. The idea of looking down on witchcraft from the ceremonial position is not new. I actually have a book right here. It's called Liber ABA by Aleister Crowley. And there's one formula in here. It's called the Ishtal formula, I'm pretty sure, which is how Crowley thought witchcraft works. it's bad. It's probably one of his worst takes. He essentially claims that like folk magic and witchcraft is just like, it's not any deeper alchemy. It's just moving things around on the surface, whatever the fuck that's supposed to mean. And you
Gotta have my WB Yeats arc.
Look, I agree with a lot of Crowley, but he did not understand witchcraft. And then Jack Parsons, who was a later Thelemite, would go and be really pro-witchcraft, and that was part of one of their kind of arguments with each other, because he's like, whoa, there's a lot of value in this stuff. It's not just like the women's ceremonial magic. And you see, like, I've seen this assumption that some ceremonial men make, that Wicca is for women and ceremonial magic is for men. And that's just very misogynistic and ironic, considering a lot of the very, very early Wiccan pioneers, like Gerald Gardner, were men. It's just bizarre, but you see this sort of, there's this connection people make between Wicca and women. I've just noticed this. Like, a lot of the time people bash on Wicca, their straw man Wiccan is like, this is the Wicca straw man. I'm gonna give you a vision of her. It's a young woman who's like 19 or 20. She likes Whole Foods. She has crystals. She goes on the TikTok. I don't know. Like, this is my attempt at making the Wicca straw man. And it's honestly just always a caricature of whatever young women are into. Like in the 90s, the way that they described like the Wiccans who read Silver Ravenwolf versus the older Wiccans or whatever. Like, it's the same. It's this recurring archetype of like the Wiccan stereotype. And it honestly, to me, just kind of feels like a misogynistic thing. Like, because if you actually look at Wicca, there's a lot of depth there. There's a lot of complexity there. And it feels like whenever people describe this like Wiccan straw man, first of all, I've never really met someone who embodies that. Like, it's a very weird trope in our community, and I do think it's misogynistic. Like, a lot of the anti-Wicca stuff going back goes to this assumption that since more women were into folk magic or into witchcraft, it must be worse because women bad. Or it's like we're talking on the internet and these people with these not like other girl pick-me complexes are like, well, I'm not like those Wiccans. I'm a serious occultist. I'm a serious practitioner. I'm not like them. And I'm like, you can justify being a serious practitioner without having to find this like straw man to be like, I'm not like her. It's very strange. And I think that there's really no way to have the anti-Wicca conversation without acknowledging that there is a level of like hatred for young women tied into it. And that goes back. Like Silver Ravenwolf. Let's get into this. So this is like old tea from like 20 years ago. So there's an author named Silver Ravenwolf. And she was slandered really hard as like a fluffy writer. But if you look at her and you compare her to other writing of the time, like, it's not that different. Like, the real reason why people don't like Silver Ravenwolf is because it's geared towards young women. That was her audience. Those were the people who really liked her. And I think that I feel like there's no way to write out the fact that a lot of anti-Wicca sentiment comes back to people don't like whatever teenage or young adult women like. Like, they get, like, they have this, like, aversion. And it's, I don't know, I think it's really toxic and kind of cursed.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot that ties into it. Like The Craft, for example, I love the movie. But that, for example, came around right at the same sort of time, right? And in general, you get a lot of like, because I haven't really heard, I mean, I've heard some people kind of say, oh, Scott Cunningham is like, he's a little bit fluffy, but no one would really put him in the same fluffiness level as like Silver Ravenwolf, right?
Very
and, like,
bad.
They're pretty similar. If you look at if you compare the work, they're pretty similar. You can kind of maybe read out a little bit more that Silver Ravenwolf has kind of like, her writing style is a little bit different, but it's very similar. And I feel like in general, like a lot of times I've seen people kind of have that weird take of like, oh, you can't be taken seriously, exactly what Georgina said. I've even seen this really toxic TikTok trend recently, which is like this audio that they used, we're not the same, or we're not the same, something like that, right?
And you were not the same. Exactly. I am the sinner, you are the sin. That's my amazing singing, by the way. Enjoy that.
It's a good song, I love it. And I like the trend to some extent. I've seen some really good takes, but I've seen a lot of times where people use it to be, and especially with Wicca, where they're like, they hold up their like really amazing books, like these really like, let's say, I don't know, whatever. I don't want to pick any specific one right now, but they pick up their book and they're like, we are not the same. And then they compare it to, for example, a Wiccan book. And it's like, what are you trying to say here? Like, can you explain that further? And they usually can't. And as the next thing, I feel like I compared it in our notes to Twilight. I feel like it's similar to just, you hate Twilight, but you have never seen or read the books. And I feel like Wicca gets a lot of that as well. But yeah, a lot of times I feel like it's just, I've seen so many comments and I get them every single month. Hey, I'm a guy, can I practice Wicca? I only see girls do it, you know? And it's like anyone can practice. It doesn't even need, you know, any sort of like labeling at all, in my opinion. But a lot of people, I've even had one today and I screenshotted it, where one person said, I'm a male and I've been feeling extremely pulled to magic and these types of practices, and people tell me only women can be witches. What's your thought? And I'm like,
yikes.
You know, and then one person replied, most of the most prominent and well-known witches, Wiccans, and occultists throughout history were men, actually. And I'm like, you're not wrong, but at the same time,
it's an interesting way to put it, because it is correct, but it's also, because it's like, you're valid because the history are mostly men. It's a weird take because it's true, and it's like it's right, but it's like a, I don't know, there's something.
It's not a good thing, but it's right.
Hold on, woman, hold on.
It's one of those, like, the men were well known, the women were still there. It has this, okay, so Wicca and astrology, if you don't know, Ella, I'm an astrologer.
I know.
They have this weird, like, parallel in this way with the misogyny stuff, and similar roots in a certain sense, where astrology was spearheaded by men. I don't want to say created because we don't actually know, but the most prominent astrological writers and thinkers and figures for hundreds of years, thousands of years technically, were 99% men. And the same thing with Wicca, where the most well-known person involved in Wicca, or especially in like modern day, the two names that come up most, if you don't bring up Silver Raven Wolfe, it's Gerald Gardner and Scott Cunningham. It's two men.
And Raymond Buckland.
And Raymond Buckland, yes. So those three. And so, like, maybe you'll get the one woman in there. But with astrology, like, astrologers said women can't do astrology. They're too dumb for it. They can't practice it as well. Their woman brain and their periods will get in the way, or some weird bullshit like that. And so it's this interesting current where now that it's gone from being associated with men to being associated with women, it goes from, this is very serious, like Wicca started very ceremonial, and it was another branch of ceremonial magic, to Wicca got associated with young women, now it's stupid and dumb. Astrology went from a literal science that was practiced by court astrologers for kings. Like,
we should bring that back. There
are records of astrologers telling kings when to go to war. There's one record, I'd have to dig it up, I don't know what it's from exactly, but there's a record of an astrologer telling a king, do not go out and meet your enemy, let him come into the city, because the stars are telling us that the time is right for them to come in, and if they come in, they will lose. And they let them come in, and they were able to, like, get around them and like, attack them, essentially. Like, by letting them in, they won. The astrologer was able to predict this. They could predict when kings would die, when armies would invade. Like, astrology was this really serious thing. And then it dropped out for a while, even through the medieval ages. Dropped out for a while, came back way later in like 1900s, and as soon as it became associated with women, now we've got that trope of dumb astrology girls, stupid, they ask me on my sign on my date, she's dumb, women do astrology and men do science. And so both of them have this tangent of, now that women do it, it's dumb, and I don't have to respect it anymore. It's really, really awful.
It's a weird one, because I feel like Wicca, I remember Wicca being incredibly, like, you know, older books being like, oh, you know, women were oppressed, women were like the main ones being like, you know, with the witch trials and whatnot, right? And it was almost like an empowering thing. Whereas now you've kind of come full circle, where people are like, ugh, Wicca, you know? So it's just really weird, like, what we've, like, and I'm really glad that we're talking about it now, because I feel like it was so popular to talk shit about Wicca. Sorry if I'm cussing so much.
No, it's a trend, and this is a trend I've noticed in the community. A lot of people do not have any discretion or ability to ask questions. They're like, you know, the NPC meme, like the no player character. where
Yeah.
it's like the person who's just like a computer. I think that's a lot of people in the community sometimes. Like,
Mhm.
someone will say Wicca bad, and like the NPC witch talkers will be like, Wicca bad.
Yes,
Wicca bad.
Wicca bad.
Wicca
absolutely.
And
bad.
they like will not ask questions. Like, I have had people comment on my videos, like stuff, and I'm like, have you Googled this? And they're like, I saw a video,
No.
must be true. And I'm like, did you never learn like not everything you read is true? Because I feel like what happened is people just hear Wicca bad and they don't dig any deeper. Like, a lot of people will say Wicca bad because cultural appropriation. I'll say, okay, what do they appropriate? And they'll be like, they appropriate. And I'm like, wow, very
Mhm.
good conversation there. Good job. Good
Mhm.
point. Because people with Wicca in particular, what they do is they see the opinion, they want to feel righteous, they want to be the one leading the
Exactly.
mob because it feels good. I really think,
Exactly.
honestly, a lot of online discourse is just people who didn't get to bully people in high school who are now like living out their bully fantasies on the internet. Because they'll
Yeah.
find something to feel righteous about and they'll go, yeah, I'm going to attack random people. And they do it, and it feels good. It makes them get clout. You know, they get positive attention for it, and they're able to take out that cruel impulse that exists in all people on someone and have the moral high ground. And I don't think these people even believe what they're saying. Because I have met people who will publicly say things and then in private tell me completely different things. They want to
Oh, yeah.
just like lead the mob. And I don't even think half the time it's really about a care for what they're arguing for. Like, I don't think
Yeah.
half of them even give a shit. They just want to like find some random girl on the internet who's just having a good time and reading Cunningham and just like release their inner rage because of their personal shit on them. Like, and I know that's
I
harsh,
see a lot of
but I think that's
I
what's
see a lot of
happening.
the appropriation conversation though, and it surrounds stuff that is not Wiccan is
Yeah,
the big
exactly.
problem. Like so the two ends of the appropriation conversation, we were discussing this behind the scenes so that we all knew sort of what we all meant by when it gets brought up. And the two things I see, the big one I see is about like Wiccans using white sage and all that, and chakras and like all these things that are in fact appropriated from other cultures, regardless if they're open or not. None of that exists within Wicca, like in
Exactly.
formal traditional Wicca. That does not exist. That is a, I'll call it New Age influenced eclectic witchcraft.
Mm-hmm.
It's
Yeah.
not Wicca.
Well-
So it's not a Wiccan thing. And this exists in other things too. I've seen Norse pagans try to use chakras. It's super weird. I've seen a lot of Hellenic pagans will try to mix in chakras and use white sage and all
Which
these weird things.
chakras, I feel like we got to give it a little bit of nuance on. Chakras are not closed. Chakras are
No,
not
yeah, that's
gated
why I
off.
said it's not necessarily closed
Okay, cool.
cultures. It's
Yeah.
just that they get the information wrong and they're appropriating something and then changing
Yeah,
it
they
and
it's
whitewashing
with
it.
chakras. It's just that people bastardize it. I think that's the best word for it, even more so than appropriation.
They're whitewashing it. It's what it is. It's a
Yeah.
whitewashed version. So they end up with that half, which is legitimate appropriation, but it's not in Wicca. And then the other half of what is in Wicca is not really something that you could, in good faith, call appropriation on that same level. And it feels weird to call it appropriation, where essentially the only critique I've seen is the names of the holidays are taken from words from, they usually just call it Celtic. I don't remember which ones it is in particular, if it's like
They're
Irish or Scottish or what.
various. I know one of
There's various
Mabon.
ones.
I know is Welsh. One of the other one is Irish or something.
Samhain, I think
Yeah.
is Irish. Correct me if I'm wrong, listeners. I think it's Irish, and if I remember it, it's like the word for November
Which
or something like that. So it's just like and one of them's like the name of a god. So it's these little things that are like, it's not on the same level as using white sage and chakras and the whitewash bastardization, legitimate appropriation that happens with this other stuff that's not in Wicca, or it's words from Irish, Scottish, that area that just mean something else. It's not even appropriation. The information is wrong. You should be able to critique that. But it feels really disingenuous to call it appropriation and to act like it's on that same level of other appropriative practices that we need to be calling out in the first place. So it drowns out the voices of marginalized communities who are asking for respect and for people to stop appropriating by equating Wicca's holidays with it. It's just really weird.
a lot of the
feel like we're
critiques of Wicca
focusing-
with this regard are just eclectic witchcraft critiques. Like, most of it is just like people who are basically just doing eclectic witchcraft and they just blame it on Wicca and then are able to ignore what's in their community. Because it's really easy to act like a wide community-wide problem. Because these, like the chakra conversation, that's a community-wide problem. I don't think that's like a Wicca problem. You see it in like everywhere, okay? Right? White sage, that's a community-wide problem. I feel like when you can just have this convenient scapegoat of Wicca, you don't have to realize, oh wait, that's in my community too. Like, I feel like that's a lot what we're seeing, because there are genuine things you can be critical of Wicca of that I like, I see some credence there, right? Like, there's like, I'm not a Wiccan, there's some theological things that I disagree with on Wicca, but I don't think Wicca bad, like, there's a big difference between being like, there are a few things that I critique, which we should all be critiquing our own communities. I have critiques of my own practice at Thelema, to be honest. Like, and being like, Wicca is literally destroying the community.
Yeah.
Like, there's a big gap there. And I think people are just lacking that nuance.
And people are misplacing their like energy on Wicca. Like, I feel like it's, the band-aid on the like gashing wound, right? Like, there's big issues in the community, and people don't address it as much as they address how problematic Wicca apparently is, right? And it's like, you could use this energy for much more important things.
There was something you brought up when right before we started recording, where the word you used was like performative activism.
Oh
like
yeah,
that's
like
what it. Yeah, that's entirely what it feels like. It just felt, performative activism, like, it's a problem in all parts of our community, but like we were saying, Wicca is that easy scapegoat for people to just be like, oh, I've heard people say, like we were talking about the NPC people on TikTok, like, I've heard people say that Wicca's bad before, like, obviously this must be a thing. I'm not going to do my own research and like actually be an activist. I'm just going to do this performative bullshit and like attack Wicca because it's easy and because I'm a misogynist.
From an activist standpoint, who is it helping? Like, I don't really think. Let's be pragmatic. If you comment on a Wiccan's TikTok, you are a appropriator. Yikes, sis. Keep it in the drafts. Let me know how many marginalized people you have helped. The answer is 0. Like, why don't you just, if you care so much, instead of typing, yikes, sis, did you not hear Wicca is bad? SMH, girl. Maybe, like, have you considered...
Like, are we helping the ancient Celts?
Have you considered volunteer... Yeah, like, let's say you really think that they use the term Mabon is bad because it's a Welsh god. Why don't you, like, donate to a Welsh commission or campaign for Welsh independence? I don't know, there are things you can do.
Do you know, like, what problems Welsh people are actually concerned about?
Yeah, like, why don't you, like, actually help Welsh people instead of being like, yikes, girly, Mabon is a bad term, do not like SMH... Like, you're not helping anyone. Like, I know people are like, yeah, I'm being an activist. And I'm like, tell me how many Welsh, like the average Welsh person who's just like sitting in their house, living their day, that you have benefited by commenting bullshit. Because it's none. It's same with like people who go and make like virtue signal tweets. Like, they'll tweet, Wicca is bad. Like, yeah you've really, you really solved racism there. Congratulations. The world has changed. Like, it's not even helping who you claim to help. It's not.
Yeah,
the
like...
worst part is... Oh, sorry, you go.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Sorry, I'm like...
No, it's hard.
No, we're all getting heated, yeah.
So something that I feel like is actually constructive is constructive criticism, right? Like, I've gone over my older YouTube videos of my older like videos with Wicca, and I'm like cringing at them. I'm like, oh, I'm missing information, or I got it wrong, or like misrepresenting something. I've even, like, I used chakras like 4 years ago, and now I completely stay away because I kind of am like, I don't really know that much. And, it's like really like murky territory essentially. But I feel like, when people point things out in a video where they're like, hey, be careful with, and a specific thing, that's so much better than throwing weird passive aggressive, look at how good I am, look how bad you are, sort of shade. Like, you're not doing anything, you're not helping anyone except your own ego, you're feeding your own ego. I've seen people like salt, that one bothers me. I see people make spells and they're like, bury the salt outside, and I'm like, no, don't do that. And I feel like people should, take the time, if they see someone actually making like a mistake or something like that, first of all, you should, consider maybe that person doesn't know it either, and maybe educating is a better approach. Most people don't maliciously post misinformation. Don't post malicious like misinformation. Most people. I've seen, some that I'm like, okay, but But a lot of times, you know, it's as simple as either privately like messaging the person if like their DMs and stuff are open and being like, hey, by the way, I noticed. And then hoping that the person doesn't get like butthurt. Or, you know, just like mentioning it in the comments. Because
Politely.
that's politely, exactly, without being
Mhm.
like, you clearly are a newbie. You don't even know anything about it, you know? And it's just like, that's just not like doing anything for anyone besides
Mhm.
yourself.
You know who's done that for me recently, like literally today, that I appreciated, was Ocean Keltoy. So I was talking, because this is like related. I was going off so I got to do a whole tangent for this. Okay, so friend of the show Viv had made a thread about how people are just trying to bash Wicca. Like, it's related to this episode topic. People just bash Wicca without ever knowing anything about it, and then they make these really awful accusations about Gerald Gardner, calling him a pedophile with no
Which is not
like
true.
no reason. It's
Mm-hmm.
not true at all. There's no record of it anywhere. It's just a lie made up by people who hate Wicca. So they were going on about that, and then somebody in the comments was talking about how the Wiccans appropriate from Norse paganism, which is also a lie. Number one. Number two, you
Wicca's
can't
like
appropriate Norse paganism.
Wicca's literally like a smash together of the different Celtic nations.
Yeah.
And number three, that's just dumb and it's white supremacist rhetoric. So I made this thread talking about it, and one of the points I spoke about was how, like, technically Iceland voted to convert. It's not like it was entirely a by the sword, we're so marginalized kind of thing.
Yeah.
And obviously there's more to it, but it's Twitter, you don't have so many characters. And he was like, hey, I just want to make sure you know that, like, the Iceland voting thing was not necessarily just like a, hey, let's have a democratic vote. Like, they were being starved out by other nations who were essentially threatening them to convert or else, like, or starve. So, like, there was more to it. And I was like, I enjoy having extra information. I was mostly referencing, like, the comparison to, say, Native Americans,
Mm-hmm.
where they were genocided or
Yeah,
to be forced to
exactly.
convert. Like, trying to compare them in terms of appropriation and impact and whatever of conversion is unfair, because you just can't
It's not
you
the
can't
same.
do that. But he was kind enough to step in and be like, no disrespect, I just want to make sure you have this information out there, and I really appreciate it. But I'm flabbergasted that people were coming for Viv's neck so hard that they muted the thread, because every time that Wicca gets brought up, especially on Twitter, people come in and make these stupid claims about appropriation, about Gerald Gardner being a pedophile, about all
Mm-hmm.
these stupid things that aren't true, and they're shitting on it, and it's a lot of misogyny. Like, all of it just comes back, and I think it's a real shame that people don't actually know the depth that Wicca has, because while it's not for me, I did start with Wicca, and it's a big foundation for a
Mhm.
lot of the
Same.
members of our community, even still today, but especially our our older leaders, like the older generation,
Yeah.
who really got their start in the 90s when I was a baby. um like, I was born in 95, that's just what it is. So they were getting their start when I was born, and a lot of the people who, maybe they're Wiccan still, maybe they're not, but our leaders, our elders, started with Wicca, and so we have to acknowledge our roots, and it's a shame that no one wants to, because they dismiss it for reasons that are untrue.
Finding the divinity within yourself. That's what I really, really kind of learned with Wicca, is just like, the sounds maybe new agey or whatever. Maybe someone's going to say that, but the like connection that we have to the universe, right? Um, it's true though. I feel like it's really true, and I feel like Wicca. I mean, even if it's not something that someone sticks with, and even if it is a little bit of a gateway drug, I feel like it is a lot of times, very, very emotional still for people, even if they still have to. I feel like sometimes people have to learn to accept their Wiccan past in a way and appreciate it, that it did open the doors for them and that it did help and contribute. And sometimes people, don't want to admit it because of current, like, the like what's going on right now with how people are associating Wicca as. But and then something I've actually learned as well, to be more like proud of it in a way, I suppose, because of how healing it was for me, and how just that divine sort of, yeah, I don't know, that connection, I suppose you can call it, and everything that it has taught me. And I feel like that's just something that people sometimes overlook and want to overlook, and they like purposefully try to not see the good side in Wicca. And there's definitely like several good parts of Wicca, you know, even if it's not necessarily for you. I feel like, you know, no one would bash, well, maybe some, but like you don't usually like hear people bash other paths as much as Wicca. And yeah.
I think if other paths are bashed, it's for very different reasons. Just because I know that Norse paganism has a very rocky history, so there's a lot of fairly valid critiques of
Yeah.
its origins and stuff. But it's with far more validity to critique Norse paganism than there ever has been to critique Wicca, and that's the funniest part to me is that I've heard far more people bash Wicca way harder than they've ever bashed Norse paganism,
Mm-hmm.
and we have literal Nazis who started the movement. Like,
Yeah.
hello.
Exactly. So something to consider, I think. So I feel like some people just need to like reconsider and like analyze kind of their own path. And I know we had this in our little paper thing, you know, because a lot of people that like hate on Wicca don't realize how much of a Wiccan influence is in their own path and in their own practice. Like people, you know, for example, a lot of the principles of Wicca or the celebrations and the way that people celebrate these things, right? Not even the origin of the celebrations like the Sabbats, right? But the way that we celebrate them today are heavily influenced by Wicca. And a lot of writing and ideas, even modern books, will have a slight Wiccan twinge to them just because of so much that has you know, been written about Wicca in the past. And so I feel like even a lot of like more different type of practitioners nowadays, a lot of them have oftentimes started with Wicca, so it'll always kind of like sneak in a little bit in a way, and people don't like to admit it.
Well, and that's the thing, like, when I was doing research for the outline for this episode, like, that was something that I found was, like, Wicca, like, in and of itself, it is, like, a witchcraft-based religion in a lot of ways, and so, like, it uses a lot of different terminology than maybe, like, the ceremonial traditions do, but, like, at its core, like, they all descend from Hermeticism, and, like, so they're all
Mm-hmm.
talking about relatively the same thing, like, just because, like, in Wicca, they, like, revere the sun and the moon as, like, the god and the goddess, that is practically the same concept as, like, working with, like, the left and right pillar in, like, Thelema or, like, Kabbalah. Like, it's all of the tenets all come from, like, the same delineation of, like, how do I even want to call it, like, academic
Yeah.
occultism, I guess. Like, and so it's just different words for similar concepts, and I think people get hung up on, like, the fact that Wicca, like, uses more nature-based metaphors to
Mm-hmm.
explain this stuff,
Yeah.
and they take that and associate it with, like, oh, it's hippy-dippy, and it's not as deep as, like, my ceremonialism is.
I'm so much deeper than you. Everyone likes to
Yeah.
think they're like the one person who knows the truth. When in
Exactly.
reality, it's very possible that other people have good ideas too.
Yeah. I was once on TikTok bashed. That got so many views and so many comments because I talked about how important it is to ground and center in your practice, not only before and after like any sort of workings, but in general. And people were like, not everyone grounds and centers. And
Oh
I'm
my
like, okay.
god, I hate that shit.
Oh,
I said eclipses are bad omens, and someone commented, in this one specific culture, they're not.
Go fuck
oh
yourself.
my God.
I'm
Yeah,
like,
it's
oh
like,
wow.
no.
Sorry,
I hate that. What's the phrase? Not everything on the internet is about you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I hate.
Not
yeah,
everything's
there's-
about you. You're not the sun. The world does not revolve
Okay,
around
I
you.
want to put it out there. I think that some of the Wicca bashing also comes, and we have this on the outline as well, and I really want to get to it before we're done. I think some of the Wicca bashing is also a revolt against religious trauma they felt in the past, and a revolt against organized religion
Exactly.
in
Yeah,
general.
well, because Wicca's
where
more
they
organized
think
than some other ones.
yes,
Mhm.
but they seem to have this idea that because there's like I think it's the term priest, like high priest, high priestess. I think that they're really against like that, and it just sparks something in them.
The
And so they have
hierarchy.
this idea that Wiccans talking about their practice, like it's good generally to ground and center and cleanse and whatever. Generally, pretty good advice. If you don't want to do it, Wiccans are not saying you must or you're evil. No, they're just
Mhm.
like, this would be a good idea according to my practice and what I believe. It's really good for me. And if you're somebody who has a very, like, you shouldn't have to give all those caveats. It's just, this is very
Exactly.
good. And you, as a thinking human being who is old enough to be on the internet, if you're old enough to be on TikTok, on Instagram, on Twitter,
No.
per the TOS,
I am
you should have
12.
enough comprehension to know that if I'm saying that if you have blonde hair, a purple shampoo might be good for you to reduce any orangeness, it would be fucking stupid for somebody who's a brunette like me, like my color hair, to jump in and be like, well, I have brown hair. Okay,
Yeah.
it wasn't for you. Okay. Like, please, can we just stop thinking that everything on the internet is directed at you in particular, person? This is about you, John.
Like
Like,
logical
no, this is
thinking.
I do not relate.
statement. Can't relate.
It's yeah. I feel like a lot of times people take things very personally. They also have like no more logical thinking and no more sort of like critical thinking abilities somehow. They just go out of the window. And like people pick things apart to a degree where at this point, you know, I'm not sure if you know how much YouTube you you guys watch.
You people.
More than I should.
Yeah, but like I've noticed you can almost always skip 5 minutes ahead into the video because 5 minutes is just disclaimers of like everyone does things differently, it's absolutely valid, don't you know, like that kind of thing, that sort of sense.
Yep.
And like I feel like
Mhm.
these type of things, like in my mind, they're like obvious, you know, but unfortunately it seems a lot of people get very upsetty spaghetti because they like they don't have that disclaimer and then they get attacked and it's like no, you don't have to feel so attacked.
My final thoughts are, if someone starts telling you that a tradition is bad, say Wicca is bad, ask them why. Ask them for sources and make sure those sources are not just like some random Google Doc that someone wrote at some point, because that does not count as a source, or a random blog post with no citations saying Gardner is a meanie. Please
Yeah.
use discernment and nuance, and don't believe what you're told online. And if someone says, don't ask me questions, this is just true, remember that if something is true, it never fears people asking questions about it, because otherwise they would always come to because if something is true, people will come to the conclusion that it's true. And so the only time that people feel the need to silence dissent is when they know that they're lying. And that is why you should always ask questions. Even if people say something is entirely bad, try to figure out why. Don't just go, okay, yeah, I agree with that. Ask questions, be discerning, have nuance, and don't just like believe the narratives you're told, because oftentimes on social media there's misinformation, and sometimes that misinformation is popular. And because of that, when you see misinformation, speak out against it, because if you do not speak out against it when the misinformation is new, by the time you actually can speak out against it because you have the confidence to, or whatever, it will have been consensus. And at that point, your comment isn't going to make a difference at all. So cut misinformation off at the roots, stop it before it spreads, and defend Wicca.
Blessed be.
Blessed be.
Blessed be. My final thoughts are, God, how was I going to phrase this originally in my head? Fuck, you said blessed be and my brain was like,
I'm
haha,
sorry.
fun, short circuit. My final thoughts are, sometimes when a tradition or practice is critiqued, we should look at what's being critiqued and why it's being critiqued, because certain things are not really worth critiquing. Like, they misused a word. Okay, cool. If there are valid things to critique, which every tradition has, I firmly believe every tradition has something to critique about it. Focus on the things that are valid critiques. Don't just try to make it up because you hate a particular Wiccan and they were mean to you once. There are bad people in every tradition. There are stupid people in every tradition. It doesn't make the tradition itself stupid. Individuals should not be your full representation of an entire path. And if you really want to critique it, you should do your proper research into it, because knowledge is power.
Exactly.
My final thoughts are that despite the fact that most people have no idea what Wicca is really about, like within the occult community, Wicca was foundational for us as a community. The Wiccan, like the people who, how do I want to word this? leaders in the Wiccan community, like ever since the founding of Wicca, have helped our community to grow. We talked about how they helped us with legal advocacy. They've helped with mutual aid. Like they've helped us like with our stigma in the public eye. Like our modern community owes so much to the Wiccan community. And personally, I think it's very sad and very, very out of touch. I'm trying not to be mean to the community. Fuck, I should have worded this better.
Be mean.
I think that it's an asshole move for the occult community to villainize Wicca as much as we did, because literally we would not be here if they had not existed. And so if you feel some kind of way about Wiccans, I highly suggest that you research your history a little bit, because like I said, we would not be here without them. So give Wiccans a little bit of grace. We owe them a lot.
So you guys basically summarized exactly what I wanted to say. By the way, if my audio sounds different, I just moved into the bathroom because my sister kicked me out of her room.
Oh, nice.
Okay.
Oh, no.
But my final words are: have a look at your own path and maybe analyze it and see what you can find that maybe is Wiccan influence that you weren't so aware of, and what you actually can take away from Wicca for your own path, even if you don't practice Wicca. Just have a look at what you can kind of like appreciate about it, even if it is, what Anthony already mentioned, or, Georgina and Nike. Like in general, I feel like a lot of times Wicca has helped us in a big way in the community in general, and kind of just say thanks to it and analyze where your hate is coming from and why you're having that kind of emotion, and like just inspect that. Like, is it maybe misplaced, or where exactly is that like dislike coming from? And if you can kind of like work through that a little bit. So yeah.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
And patrons, we get to thank you, and if you pay the $10 tier up, you get a thank you by name. So thanks to everybody who helps support the show, but a special thanks to Adrius, Amy, Evan, Hamda, Halsey, Jonah, Lita, A Sociology of Tarot, Alejandra, Angry Pratt, Anna, Bridget. Bridget. I'm gonna go with that one. I know this name. Doth Nihilus? Okay, if it's DAATH, is it Doth or Dot?
Be dot. Yeah. It's just a
Dot
different
Nihilus.
transliteration of the word dot.
Doitsu, Jay, Jessica, Lee, Leo, Lilith, Marcelo, Marshall, Mike, MK Scorpio 89, Nauseated, Neon, Nicole, Rowan, the Lady Ghost, and Victoria. You guys help keep the show alive. I love saying MK Scorpio 89 in that whisper. It's so much fun.
If you want to support the show, you can join our Patreon. You get extra shows, extended shows, pre-shows, and your name read off, as well as early access. You get a lot of things if you become a patron. And it helps us keep doing this so you can enable our behavior. But if you want to find me, I'm Georgina Rose. I go by Dot Darling at DAT on, and I'm going to pull up my list because I made a list.
I won't.
Because I am very professional and I definitely know what I'm doing. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, Twitch, YouTube, Telegram, Odyssey, Patreon, and Ko-Fi, and I host this podcast.
I'm Nike. You can find me at Warrior Witch Nike pretty much everywhere. I have a link tree, so I don't have to remember all my stuff. That's it.
And I'm Anthony. If you want to connect with me, I am on Instagram and on Twitter. I think my handle is at Anthony the Witch. And yeah, I haven't even heard of most of those platforms, so that's all I have for you.
So I'm Ella.Harrison, or just Ella Harrison, on YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. And you could try punching it in different ones. Maybe it'll come up with other platforms that I've forgotten. But I also have a link tree, so you can go check that out as well. I also have a shop called ekstones.com, or Silver from Crystals, but that is currently inactive because we're moving. But if you have a look at that, we update it regularly, or semi-regularly. So if you're interested in that, check that out as well.
And this has been Magnolias and Magic.